Vegan Cooking Odyssey class. Today we're making the Rajasthani inspired butternut squash and potato curry. It's a North Indian style curry, or I should say this particular recipe is an Americanized adaptation of a North Indian style curry that is going to make use of these two very well-known vegetables, very simple vegetables, and it's going to elevate them to a whole nother level. This recipe has really astonished me the 2 times I've made it, I think, so far. What I love is there are a lot of spices involved, and as you'll see in a moment, some of them are kind of specialty things that are hard to find. You don't need to use them. A lot of these are optional or can be replaced with something simpler, but this recipe can take in as much complexity as you give it and will be much more rewarding for it. We're going to use this great Dutch oven again. Try to use something with a lid. You can use a skillet if that's all you have, a really large skillet. We're also going to serve it with some rice, and you can use basmati or jasmine, white or brown. You can use whichever you have on hand, whichever you're in the mood for. I have this really lovely Thai style white jasmine rice, which I'm going to make with it. So we'll do that, and it'll come together in about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, including prep. So the first thing we have to do is dice our squash and our potatoes. For those who haven't diced a butternut squash, or any squash for that matter, before, I am going to show just a quick demonstration of how to do that safely and efficiently. So as you can see, this butternut squash, and pretty much any squash you can find, is very much rounded and can slide all over your cutting board. So the first thing you want to do is make some large cuts to create flat surfaces so it doesn't slide around. So the first cut I'm going to make is going to be right here, which is going to separate the cylindrical part from the bulbous part. So just hold it steadily with your hand and then grip your knife, and you might have to seesaw back and forth a little bit, but you want to just go straight down. And there we have some flat surfaces right away. I'll put those down. Next, we want to cut both of these in half lengthwise. So you can see there's the top and there's the bottom. We want to cut right through each of those. So right here on the top, I'm going to make a small incision, press down a little bit so it just kind of nestles in there. And then once I feel more confident about where my knife is, I can just go all the way down. And there is our beautiful squash. Same thing with the bulbous part. Only the bulbous part is going to have a bit of a surprise for us once we open it. All the seeds. So our next step is going to involve a spoon, any spoon you have, and we're going to scoop out this flesh and the seeds and just put it in the trash. As a lot of recipes will tell you that if you really want to save these, you can roast them. They're pepitas, they're edible, but it's a whole nother step, it's a whole nother recipe. We're not interested in them for this one. Just scooping the flesh and the seeds right out. Perfect. So we're left with this lovely cavern. Okay, so now we have our 4 quadrants of squash. We've gotten rid of the seeds and the flesh and the bulbous parts. The next step will be to peel it. And for that I have this nice peeler right here. Ideally it's one with a somewhat wide blade like that. If you really don't have anything serviceable, you can use your knife, but it's just a little less safe. So I'd recommend a nice peeler like this. And if your squash isn't too old, you'll see it comes right off. The older your squash gets, the harder this might be. But we're just going to keep going until we just see the yellow flesh. Okay, so we're all done peeling our squash. We can just discard the squash peel right there. So finally, now we are ready to dice. So with your knife, you can kind of start on whichever quadrant you'd like. And I guess there's less of a method to this part, but we're going to make about 1.5 inch cubes with our butternut squash. So just loosely measure that out in your head. I'm going to go lengthwise like this first. Maybe we'll go like there. And again, be careful. You know, you don't have to rush it. Sometimes you do have to strain yourselves, but definitely make sure you're doing this cutting safely. So now, with each of these strips, I'm just going to cut into little cubes. And that's about what we're looking for. Something like this is a little wide, so I'm going to cut this maybe one more time. And then I'll just be a little bit more generous, like that. Okay, and after working through all 4 of those quadrants, we are done. And you can see some of the pieces are going to be a little larger than others because the bulbous part does create some strange little, has a strange little volume. But it's totally fine as long as the average size seems about right. So now we're going to also dice these potatoes. I have small Yukon Golds. Ideally you're using a Yukon Gold. It can be much larger than this. You just have to dice it down. You want to dice it slightly smaller than the squash because the potato is going to take slightly longer to cook. So in this case, I'm probably just going to cut each of these into about, I don't know, 4 to 6 maybe pieces or so. Maybe a tiny bit smaller than this. Okay, so here's a bowl of our diced butternut squash and our baby Yukon potatoes. The goal for this recipe serves about 4 people. You want 2 pounds of squash and potatoes total. So in this case, I have perfectly gotten, maybe not quite perfectly, we're 0.1 of an ounce off according to the scale. But this is 2 pounds of squash and potatoes. And in this case, I've actually done about 1 pound of each. So it's a 50-50 split on them. And this was about maybe 10 to 12 of these little potatoes. I do still have some of these left over, and I actually have some squash left over too. Save them for another day, save them for another recipe. Otherwise, if you are cooking for more than 4, you can maybe double this recipe by doing 2 different batches. Okay, before we begin, just the other ingredients in this recipe. We do need a medium tomato. This is going to be diced with its juices. And for the other piece of produce is some lemon juice, about a teaspoon. There's a special mango powder used in Indian cuisine, I think called amchur powder, which I've yet to find myself. So I've been told that the best substitute is just a little bit of lemon juice. That's going to go on at the end. The most important part of our recipe is probably the mix of spices we're going to use to flavor our squash and potato. So just a quick rundown of them. We're going to add them in about two batches. One is going to be more aromatics and seeds that are going to cook first, and then we're going to add some powders after. So the first batch of spices includes a cinnamon stick. If you just have ground cinnamon, that's fine. We're going to use whole cloves, 2 whole cloves. If you don't have whole cloves, but you just have clove powder, that's fine too. We're going to use 2 cardamom pods that are going to be broken open, and we're going to include the shell in our pot. Again, if you only have ground cardamom, that's fine. A specialty item that I invested in, and I do enjoy quite a bit, are these chernushka, also called nigella seeds. These are going to add some nice flavor. If you don't have them, it's totally fine. You can just leave them out. Other seeds include mustard seeds. Oh, I have a little price tag covering mine. These are yellow mustard seeds. The recipe does say if you have black, that's even better, but I just have yellow, so that's what we're going to use. The other type of seed I have here, which again, these are a little hard to find. You can get them online. I got them back in Brooklyn when I used to live right next to an Indian grocery. These are fenugreek seeds, which also are very, very aromatic once they kind of snap and crackle in the pan. And then the next group is going to include some more familiar spices, I think. Some ground turmeric, some ground coriander, ground cumin. We have some chili powder. They're going to go in with a little bit of plant-based yogurt, which if you don't have it's okay, you don't need it. But it does add a nice little quality of fat to your flavorings. This next one, another specialty one that I have been really fortunate to find. This is asafoetida powder. It's right, if we go right in there. Asafoetida powder. It's also called hing, and this is used quite a bit in Indian cooking. Doesn't have a lot of flavor, but it has a lot of savoriness to it, and it's to that degree it's often called the Indian MSG. So you can add it to dishes, and it will just impart a lot of extra flavor in a kind of invisible way. And I guess the last thing I forgot to mention are some bay leaves, which will go in with the aromatics. Okay, so we're ready to start cooking. I've got this Dutch oven warming, and we're going to start by adding 3 tablespoons of olive oil. This recipe, I think, traditionally would be done with the ghee, the Indian clarified butter, but we're going vegan here, so we're going to use some olive oil, which will also work. So we're just going to give the olive oil a moment to get hot. And we're at about medium-high heat. It's starting to look like it's ready, so we're going to add our first batch of spices. So again, this is the cinnamon stick. We have 3 bay leaves. We have 2 crushed cardamom pods. We have yellow mustard seeds, fenugreek seeds, and we have nigella seeds. But again, oh, and we have 2 whole cloves. Almost missed them. And we're going to add those in first. Definitely try to have this all ready beforehand because it's going to go fast at the beginning, and some of these spices could burn if you're not careful enough. So these we're going to put in and wait till they start to crackle. They might fly out of the pot, but ideally the heat isn't too bad so they won't go too crazy. Okay, and I'm going to grab a wooden spoon over here and just spread those around for a bit. And again, we're going to wait till we hear a crackling. In the meantime, we're going to have a few things ready. We're going to have our second batch of spices. This has the cumin, coriander, chili powder, turmeric, and asafoetida powder. And we're also going to be adding, if you're using it, 3 tablespoons of your plant-based yogurt. Even like a plant-based milk might work, to be honest, but we were able to find this, so we'll use it. Ideally it's plain. This is vanilla and cinnamon, which will work with this recipe. We couldn't find plain. Oh. As you can hear, it's beginning to crackle. Give it a good stir. Okay, now we're going to add the yogurt and the next spices before these go too crazy. So I'm going to do 3 tablespoons of plant-based yogurt. And our other spices. And very quickly going to diffuse that. Lower the heat a little bit, and this is going to go for about 3 minutes now. If things are starting to burn, I would move to the next step a little faster. But definitely keep stirring to help avoid that burning. Alright, so it's been about 3 minutes and our spices have bloomed really nicely. You can see it's definitely crisped up a bit and reduced a little, and we're almost on the verge of burning, so now's a good time to move on to the next step. Next step, we're going to add our medium tomato that was diced and as much of its juice as you can get. We're going to add a teaspoon of lemon juice. And we're going to give this 2 more minutes for the tomatoes to reduce a little. Okay, so it's been about 2 minutes, and you can see the tomatoes have reduced a little bit. It's all blended quite nicely. It's become a little bit more watery, and now we're gonna do our last preparation before we add our squash and potatoes, and that's going to be 3/4 of a cup of water and a teaspoon of kosher salt. We're going to just quickly stir that. Shouldn't take long to get back to a boil, but either way, we are ready to add our vegetables in. So now all of the squash and potatoes are going in, and we'll give that a good mix. Okay, so our curry is just reached this low boil, and we're going to turn the heat down to about medium-low, just to keep it at a simmer, and we're going to cover it. And we're going to leave it for 15 minutes. We'll check on it then. It might need an additional 5 minutes, but yeah, you don't need to stir. You maybe want to check on it time and again. Make sure there's enough water in there and it's not burning or anything. But it should be okay. Just make sure, yeah, again, you lower the heat so it doesn't go too crazy. Okay, so while the curry's cooking, it's a good time to get the rice done. Again, I'm using white jasmine today, but you can use white or brown jasmine or basmati. Keep in mind that brown rice is going to take about twice as long. That's going to take closer to 40 minutes, where this is going to be done about 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm going to add a cup into a saucepan over here. And for white, I usually add like about, that's a little bit too much. I'll add like 1 cup and 3/4. And again, you might have to add a little bit more later on. Brown rice will require probably a little bit more water. There we go. So just cook that as you would any rice. We'll get it to a boil. We'll lower the heat, we'll cover it, and then we'll watch this for about 15 minutes. Alright, so it's been 15 minutes. This has been simmering on medium-low to low with the cover on. I'm going to remove the cover, and we're going to check on how it's doing. The water looks great. Doesn't look like it needs any more. Let's see. So we're going to check the potatoes for doneness. Those are sort of the limiting factor. So you can just try them with your fork. Maybe take a bite. Ooh, hot. It's going to need probably a few more minutes. But it's close. You do want to watch it because you don't want to overcook the squash too much. But I'm going to say this needs about 3 more minutes. Okay. We ended up having to go the full 20 minutes since covering this to get the desired doneness. But now it looks very much done. It smells really great. And you can see there's a lovely yellow-orange color all throughout. So we're going to turn the heat off. There are aromatics in there that we don't want to eat. But for now we can just leave them because we're going to plate and we'll just scoop around them. Our rice is also done. The rice took about 15 minutes, which I think that is one reason why I prefer using a white rice here. The white rice will cook in about the same time as the curry. So we'll plate the rice first. I'm just going to use a fork, or you can use one of your large spoons. And I'll just put a nice big heap here in our bowl. Okay, our camera had a quick battery problem, but here is the finished dish. Feel free to arrange it however you like, but definitely serve hot and enjoy.